They are a team of classically trained pianists with varying backgrounds and experiences who strive to raise the voices of those who are less heard and to inspire more thoughtful, inclusive programming within the performing and pedagogical spheres. A seat at the piano promotes and advocates for the inclusion, study, and performance of a more equitably representative body of piano work by creating a resource for musicians, pedagogues, and curious music appreciators. ASAP aims to broaden their knowledge of composers and their works. So today we have the privilege of hosting their team here today. I'm going to pass the floor off to Annie, their founder. And Annie, would you be able to introduce your team for us?
Yeah, sure, of course. First of all, I'm so delighted to be here. It's actually kind of funny how it ended up being myself and Susan and Brendan and Evan. All of us lived in Michigan, and or some of us studied at University of Michigan for a good amount of time. So it really warms my heart to see familiar faces. I got like a little bit emotional just like kind of seeing all your faces pop up because it's been a long time, and I feel like I left Michigan, let's see, in spring of 2019, and time has passed in this very strange way, but just seeing familiar faces just makes me really happy. So yeah, just thank you so much, Amber, for the invitation to speak to your members about the work that we do. We actually have a PowerPoint, and the introduction was kind of part of that. So maybe we'll jump to that if that's okay. And we'll kind of get started from there. If any of you at this time, also, if you have questions that kind of come up as we're speaking, by all means, please throw them into the chat. We'll kind of be monitoring it, and we'll have some time at the end for questions, but we can try to also respond to them while we're speaking as well. We just have a select member, a few members of our team, myself, Evan Hines, Brendan Jacklin, and Susan Yang. We have two other really wonderful members, Clare Longendyke and Ashlee Young, who are unable to be with us today, but we're delighted again to be here and to share some of the work that we've been doing since the summer of 2020. And the presentation that we have for you today is titled Sharing the Spotlight in addition to, not instead of, and we'll talk a little bit more of what that means. But just a bit about us. So we'll go to the next slide. So Amber already read our mission statement. We thought a lot about what we wanted our mission to be. So just to kind of go back to the starting days of A Seat at the Piano, it was founded not as A Seat at the Piano. It was founded as a very simple Google spreadsheet during the summer of 2020 when I had so much time because it was during the pandemic. And I hate using the phrase of in the wake of the death of George Floyd, because these conversations, this kind of research has been ongoing. I think right now it's being much more featured, but I think it's important to understand that a lot of people have been doing this work for a long time. It's just now being recognized. And so for myself, I was starting to kind of reckon with it myself during that summer. And with all of the events of that time, really kind of jump-starting my research of it. And it started just as a spreadsheet of composers, pieces that they had played, and it all stemming from the fact that, I went to University of Michigan for my master's and my doctorate. And during that time, I can count on my hand the number of works that I played either by a woman composer or a Black composer, someone that was not from the Western Eurocentric culture of standard repertoire. And so truthfully, I was ashamed. I really was. And with all of the conversations that were happening on social media, I realized that there was really a need for something like what I was starting, and I couldn't do it by myself. So very quickly, I asked the best people I knew, who are my friends, to help me. And that eventually actually branched out to other members. So Claire and Ashlee, who I actually had never met before. And it's the beautiful thing actually about connecting virtually, is that we can make our world feel much smaller, actually, and having these kind of unexpected connections with other people. And the way that Ashlee has been contributing with her research of more beginner and intermediate works. And then Claire, she's a fantastic pianist who has a performing career and also has had a lot more of experience within the nonprofit world. She's also been extremely valuable on our team too. Let's go on to the next slide. So yeah, this is just who we are. Again, Ashlee, she lives in Oregon. Claire lives in Indiana for the most time. She was in Chicago for a good bit as well, but I'm actually going to let everyone kind of introduce themselves. I guess some of you know me, but some of you don't. I went to University of Michigan, go Blue, and right after graduation, I moved to Greensboro, North Carolina, which is where I am now, and I am an assistant professor of piano and piano pedagogy at University of North Carolina at Greensboro. So yeah, actually maybe our seasonal spring allergies are a little bit ahead of you. Like my voice is a total mess right now because I'm dealing with spring allergies. But yeah, it's getting quite warm down here. And I'll pass it over to Evan. We'll just kind of go in a row.
Good morning. Good morning. It's great to be with you all today. I can't see you, but y'all looked great before Brendan started sharing a screen. Like Annie said earlier, we happened to overlap while we were in Michigan. I did my master's in collaborative piano at the University of Michigan. And then afterwards, I went and worked as a staff pianist at Oberlin Conservatory, where I happened to do my undergrad for a few years. And now I am currently in my first year of my DMA at the University of Texas, also in collaborative piano.
Let's go to Susan.
Hi, everyone. It's nice to make a virtual return and to see some familiar faces. I also received my DMA from the University of Michigan, and I am now based in Nashville, Tennessee, where I am assistant professor of the practice and piano at Vanderbilt University.
Hi, I'm Brendan Jacklin. I lived in Ann Arbor, but I just was there because Susan was there. I didn't go to school there at all. Did my doctorate at University of Cincinnati. And so I'm also based in Nashville, Tennessee, currently assistant professor at the University of Tennessee Southern.
Great, thank you. Brendan is an honorary Ann Arborite, so we're okay with that. So this is who we are, and I think of just a fun fact because the four of us, we knew each other beforehand, and Ashlee and Claire, we did not know. We did so many things virtually. It almost felt like we knew each other. And then last summer, we were able to have our first ASAP retreat, which we're trying to actually do once every year. And we did it in Nashville. We all met for the first time in person, and it was a very productive time. It's amazing what you can do when you're all just in the same place. And it was such a great moment for us as a team and as an organization for us to finally be able to brainstorm and be working together. With A Seat at the Piano, and also I think with any of the work that we do with equity and inclusion and diversity, I think it's ongoing. It's an ongoing process. It'd be the same way of say if you were teaching your students and they reached to the Beethoven Hammerklavier and you said, okay, great, you're done. You're a wonderful pianist. I think we're good. We don't quite reach that point at all with this work. And it has to be an active, mindful way of incorporating it into our everyday lives. At A Seat at the Piano, we acknowledge the fact that we are not a solution, that we are really merely just a starting point. And we hope to just be that point of reference as a resource for you to do your research and to explore and to just be curious.
So speaking of resources, I'm just going to do a really quick primer on the website if you haven't had the chance to check it out, just to sort of showcase a little bit about what we've been doing and especially just how to use the resource. So I'm actually going to jump out of this and just go to the actual website. So this is our website. seeatthepiano.com. So you can see right off of the homepage, right, we have a list of recently added composers. You can join a newsletter, which I know Susan will talk about later. There's a blog, featured composer, all sorts of fun things. The heart of the website, though, is the database page. And so this is a searchable page. I think we've got about 2,200 pieces on there at varying levels right now. And as you'll see in a minute, plans to add a lot more as we find time. So the nice thing about this is it works kind of like just a Google search, even if it's not quite as powerful. But for example, all you have to do if you want to search for beginner pieces, you could just type in beginner, and then I've got it programmed so that everything with that keyword will pop up, right? So you can search for level, you can search for names. If you just want to browse, and I like the way it's set up right now because it is able to browse, right? A lot of these composers people don't know, and so you can't search for what you don't know. The nice thing is you can search it chronologically. You can, the default is reverse chronologically. You can sort by name, level. If you really want to just find living composers, you can do that as well. And then it just is never ending. So the list just goes on and on. And for example, if you click on the composer, you get sent to the composer page, which has information. It's got links to their website, a brief bio if you want to learn more about them, and then links to all their repertoire pieces. And then if you click on a piece, if I find one like this, it takes you to a page where we have recordings if available, program notes if there, and then leveling, length, and links to where to either purchase, rent, or find the score if it's on IMSLP or other copyright-free areas. So we tried to make it as useful as possible. One other thing in our attempts to make this as useful as possible is the coming updates page. And so if you're curious about what's coming up, these are things that we're currently working on. My summer projects are going to be these two, so you can filter composers by active century in addition to chronological. And then I'd love to be able to find time to actually add dates for every composition in our database. So that's something that's going to take me like 8 months. We have a lot of social media. YouTube is coming soon. I want to also include search by genre keywords. And so that's another project for the summer, in addition to adding concertos. That's my other plan for this summer. And then we have a list of composers that we just can't keep up with. People submit new composers every week. And so these are the people that we're trying to add as we go through it. It's quite long. Part of the length is living composers we contact first to ask for permission to be on our website. And so sometimes, you know, if they're really famous, it can take them like 6 months to get back to us. And so some of that is just because of the way we add composers, and some of it is just they have a lot of pieces and it just takes a little bit of time. But if you're curious and you're trying to find a composer that's not in our database, check here. And if it's not on this list, please let us know. I'm always happy to add more as we can. And so we'll jump back to this, and I think Susan's going to pick it up from here.
Yes. So for our presentation today, we received a request to talk specifically about the fruits of this project and how our resource has been utilized. So as Annie mentioned, our project started as a spreadsheet, but it has grown so much more beyond that. We also operate a blog now called Thoughts and Conversations, which you can find on our website. This is a space where we let others' voices be heard, and it's open to all musicians and educators to explore topics of their choosing, from social and racial issues to compositions and everything in between. So if you or someone you know would be interested in contributing and writing an article for us, please don't hesitate to reach out. We're always looking for contributors. Next, we have a newsletter that we send to our supporters to keep updated on all the news and exciting developments. And you're more than welcome to sign up for our mailing list. We also post periodically on our social media. And our posts include composer features, some fun trivia questions from time to time, updates from ASAP, and reposts from other advocacy projects that we think are relevant to our work. And so the purpose is really to engage and educate our followers. And so be sure to follow us on Instagram and Facebook if you are interested and want your weekly dose of new discoveries in piano literature. And next slide, please. So in addition to maintaining our online presence, we've been very active in our advocacy and public-facing work. Most recently, we produced an online course in partnership with the Francis Clark Center for Keyboard Pedagogy titled Hidden Gems, 4 Centuries of Keyboard Music by Women Composers. This course contains 23 pieces that we selected from our database that vary in style, era, and level of difficulty. Each piece is accompanied with a teaching video, a performance video, and a supplemental reading about the composer. So I highly recommend that you check it out, especially if you're interested in learning about wonderful but forgotten women composers throughout music history. Next slide. So recently, out of curiosity myself about how our resource is being utilized, I ran a Google search of acetapiano.com and was amazed by how many times we were referenced as a resource. So to give you a couple examples, the Music Library at the University of Toronto uses our database as a supplement to their BIPOC composer catalog. And they particularly found the function to search by composer identifier to be very useful. The Hayes School of Music at Appalachian State University uses our resource for repertoire selection for their annual piano competition, where they have a special prize for the performance of an underrepresented composer. And I know Annie has pushed her own department at UNCG to broaden their audition repertoire by using the ASAP database. So the database can be used in many ways and has served many purposes. One of the biggest purposes it has served is offering alternative performing and pedagogical repertoire to some very popular and probably overplayed pieces. So for the next part of our presentation, we'd like to show you some examples of repertoire substitution from each musical era. I do want to point out that when we talk about repertoire substitution, it can often trigger the mindset of either or. And that's why we titled our presentation today, Sharing the Spotlight in addition to, not instead of, because we want to stress the fact that playing more pieces by historically excluded composers does not mean that we have to abandon Bach, Beethoven, and Brahms. It just means that Bach, Beethoven, and Brahms are not the only great choices we have, and there are equally excellent choices that we can and should consider. Sorry, my music stand is slowly getting away from me. So, starting with the Baroque era, the first piece is a beginner level minuet written by Magdalena Dacker, whom we do not know much of because she died when she was 15. I couldn't even find a picture of her, so instead, I included a picture of the repertoire book that contains her music, which is on your way to succeeding with the masters compiled by Helen Marley. The most interesting piece of information we do have about Dacker is that she had a notebook that contained 43 pieces of music, which are mostly short compositions and typical Baroque dance pieces. 2 of those pieces are included in the Marley book, the minuet I'm referring to, and a bourrée. There's some uncertainty as to who actually wrote the music in this notebook. It was either Magdalena herself or her mother, but there is some evidence from handwriting analysis that points to Magdalena as the author, because the writing was deemed too childlike and not mature enough to have been an adult's handwriting. Next slide. This piece would make a great substitution to any easy Baroque minuet. Just as a comparison, I've included the G major minuet that we're all too familiar with. Although I would say the Dakar minuet is slightly easier because the left-hand rhythm is much more straightforward with a constant dotted half note. I also like the Helen Marley that she included dynamics in this edition to serve as a guide for the student. So since this is a short piece, I will just play it through right now so you can hear it. Okay, going on. Next composer is Elisabetta de Gamberini, who was an English composer, painter, singer, and keyboardist. She was born to Italian parents, hence the Italian name. Both of her parents were aristocrats. Sorry. Aristocrats who love the arts. So she was exposed to both visual art and music from a very early age. She also died quite young at the age of 35, most likely from childbirth. Even so, she was still very accomplished and enjoyed much success as both a composer and performer, especially given the unfavorable circumstances for women at the time. She became the first woman composer in England to publish a collection of keyboard music. She was one of George Frederick Handel's favorite singers, and she also made a name for herself from benefit concerts where she would sing and perform on multiple keyboard instruments. Apparently, she was really savvy at self-promotion. She capitalized on the novelty of her gender and her Italian-sounding name and was able to draw a lot of attention from the public. The style of de Gamberini's music has been described as late Baroque / early classical, and she composed mostly for keyboard instruments and voice. But what's neat about her composition is that many of them could be played by various instruments, and her songs especially were versatile in that way, and often they were performed with voice and instruments alternating verses. Next slide. So her piece Tambourine is an intermediate level piece that comes from a collection called Lessons for Harpsichord Intermixed with Italian and English Songs, Opus 2. She composed the set when she was only 18 years old. So historically, a tambourine is a lively dance in duple meter and usually accompanied by the percussion instrument, the tambourine. And the dance originated from France. The texture of this piece is fairly simple. Right hand carries the melody and left hand has the oscillating octaves all throughout. And this feature always kind of reminds me of the Musette in D, which is another piece from the notebook for Anna Magdalena. Tambourine doesn't necessarily have to be a substitution for Musette, but I do think the two pieces are fairly similar in character, in addition to the fact that the left-hand figures are quite comparable. And like most Baroque repertoire, this piece comes with no dynamics and articulations, which can be daunting for some students, but provides good practice for creating some personal interpretations. I actually just assigned this piece to a student last week. So, and she's never been exposed to Baroque pieces without editorial markings. And so I'm planning to work with her on incorporating echoes on repeated figures, shaping phrases according to the contour, and applying terrace dynamics on sequences. And if we're feeling ambitious, we might even try adding some simple ornaments on the repeats. So the next slide here is a recording of the tambourine. I just saw Amber's question about how we grade this piece on the website. If it's not graded on the website, we label this as intermediate, and this is actually one of the pieces that we featured in our course for Francis Clark. And our leveling, we know that the nature of leveling can be very subjective. So what we do is we usually consult Jay McGraw's book, and with a combination of the RCM syllabus, and then we kind of throw in our own mixture of knowledge and whatnot. So I believe this is a level 4 according to our syllabus for the Francis Clark Center. I hope that answers your question. So the last composer from the Baroque period we have is Elizabeth Jacques de la Guerre. Born in 1665 and died in 1729. She spent her entire life in Paris and was very well known during her lifetime. She came from a wealthy family of musicians and instrument makers. Both her father and grandfather were harpsichord builders, and along with her brothers, she received the same musical training from their father. The family support she received was very crucial for her career success. As we all know, very few women reached this level of prominence during that period. She was undoubtedly a child prodigy. At the age of 14, she was accepted as a court musician under King Louis XIV and remained one of his favorite musicians. In addition to composing, she was also known as an excellent singer, keyboardist, and improviser. And because of the strong endorsement from the royal court, her career was able to thrive even after her marriage. And many of her compositions were, of course, dedicated to the king. Most of her compositional output were vocal and instrumental genres, but she also wrote a ballet and an opera. In fact, she was the first French woman to ever compose an opera. The only period she was not quite as active was her 30s, when she had to endure the deaths of her father, mother, husband, and her only son, who died at the age of 10. So very tragic and understandable. So next slide, please. In terms of her keyboard music, she composed 4 suites, which were all published in a larger collection called Harpsichord Pieces, and she wrote these when she was 22. All 4 of her keyboard suites are highly versatile in terms of accommodating students with various levels and abilities, because you can pick individual movements or assign the entire suite. And they range widely in levels, from early intermediate minuets to very advanced allemands. And all of them include the 4 standard dances in a Baroque suite, with additional ones like the gavotte and the chaconne. So you can easily substitute a Bach, French, or English suite with one of her suites. The arrangement of the dance movements are slightly different between the 2 composers. You'll notice here that de la Guerre groups all 4 of the standard dances together, then adds the extra ones and always ends with a minuet, whereas Bach would present the first 3 dances, Allemande, Courante, and Sarabande, insert the extra dances, and then always ends with a gigue. So next slide. I actually had a hard time deciding which dance movement to present and as a substitution, because they're all very good in their own right, and a lot of the writing is very similar to Bach's. So again, none of these keyboard suites need to be just a substitution to Bach's suites. They simply make wonderful additions to one's performing and teaching repertoire. So I gravitated slightly toward the D minor suite only because I was able to find a piano recording and it seems a little bit more relevant to us. So here's a side-by-side comparison of the Sarabande from the D minor suite, which is on the left, to Bach's Sarabande from his F major English suite on the right. So you can see there's a lot of resemblance in the chordal texture, the rising and falling pairs of eighth notes, as well as the ornaments. So because we're limited on time, we'll just hear the first section of the Sarabande with its repeat.
Great. Now we're going to move on to the classical era, which already just within the repertoire that we know, it's always usually Beethoven, Mozart, Haydn, and then with the sonatinas, Kuhlau, Clementi, but we're usually quite limited within the composers that we already think of. So I'm, excited to share these comparisons of other composers. And I should also mention, especially within the Baroque and the classical era, we just have fewer composers that are known of, especially with their access to published works. So if you look at our database too, the number of pieces and composers that we have for Baroque and classical are just inherently a little bit smaller. All right, so the first composer that I'm going to be talking about is Hélène de Montgeroux. So of course I wanted to talk about sonatas and sonatinas, but I also think that an important part of this classical era is the attention of technique and how many composers were writing kind of etudes or kind of technical exercises. We often kind of think of Hanon or Czerny or Pichna. But Hélène de Montgeroux, I've been doing a lot of research on her myself, and I'm fascinated by her. She is a French composer, and she studied with Duschek and Clementi, so obviously had really wonderful instruction. And she was also the first woman professor at the Paris Conservatoire in 1795. A fun fact is that during the French Revolution, she was imprisoned, but she was released because she was able to showcase her wonderful compositions and her improvisational skills for the French Committee of Public Safety, and so was released. So in addition to several other sonatas and larger scale works that she wrote, something that she really contributed to the piano repertoire, though, was of 3 volumes of exercises and etudes. And this was called the Cours complet pour l'enseignement du forte piano. And it consists of 972 exercises and 114 etudes. The first volume is really just dedicated to exercises, and then the second and third are more of the actual etudes that get progressively more difficult. And she has basically every exercise or etude that you could imagine. So in the next slide, I included just a few screenshots of some of the examples from the first volume. And a lot of them, they look basically kind of like the incipits that you find in Hanon, for example, that you can then transpose. I like this exercise that I have on the top here, working on rotation or things like that. What's interesting also about this first volume is that in addition to technical exercises like scales, 5-finger patterns, she includes things even like in the second on the right side of syncopations or alternating of the hands. There's score reading at the very end of this massive book. So anything you can imagine, trills, I think there's one on ostinatos. Like, she really thought of everything. And in the next page on the next slide, this is a table of just the first part of her second volume. So these are the first sets of etudes that she wrote. And something that I find to be rather interesting is that she sequences the etudes, not just by difficulty level, but by hand. So if you look at the columns on the right, there's the first column, de deux mains, so an etude for both of the hands, de main droite, so of the right, and then de main gauche of the left. So if you wanted to say specifically assign an etude for a student who needs a little bit help with their left hand, you can look at this table and do a little bit of French translation and decide some of these etudes that you could assign for your students. So I'm going to show you just 2 brief examples. This is etude number 4, and it's an etude for both hands. And you can really see that because you have the different articulations between both of the hands, the staccato in the left hand, legatos in the right hand. It's a little bit of like a tongue twister and a really, really great exercise possibly for your students. So just play a little bit of this. This is me playing it on a very out of tune piano, by the way. So I think that there's a lot that can be taught through this. Grace notes, again, articulation. In the next slide, I'm featuring one that is focusing on voicing. This is number 41. And I did a studio project with my students, number 1, as an incentive to get them to practice over winter break. And I had them all pick just any etude they wanted. I introduced these sets of pieces and had them pick one over the break, learn it. We worked on it for a few of the beginning weeks of the semester, and then we did a recording project. So we recorded whatever etude it was that they picked, because there aren't too many of them available online. And it was really interesting to see what etudes my students picked. This is the one that I picked. I wish I could have showed you a final production of like the audio and the video that we did, but this is just the audio, and we'll just hear like the first 15-20 seconds of it. Cadence to stop it. But it sounds almost like a song without words. And I think it's a gorgeous piece to add to the repertoire of technical study. Okay, we are going to keep on going. I'm worried we're going to run out of time. The next composer is Jose Mauricio Nunez Garcia. He's a Brazilian composer, and he's really influenced by Haydn and Mozart. He himself was the son of an enslaved mother, and his father was also the child of a slave. He wrote this massive requiem mass that has been even compared to like the significance of the Mozart requiem. And I'm going to talk a little bit about some of these fantasies that he wrote. So I listened to some of these fantasies and immediately I thought of another similar sonata, the Mozart Sonata in C minor, which we'll just hear the opening theme just to kind of trigger your memory. Great. And so, that's a sonata that many of us know, many of us teach, only one out of the two minor sonatas that Mozart wrote. So kind of different. But if we're thinking about texture, I found this fantasy number 5 in D major. And let's just hear a little bit of this as well. It's very, very short. Wonderful. So if we wanted to teach the concept that we hear also in the Mozart C minor, or even in Beethoven's Sonata F minor, Opus 2, number 1, the idea of the Mannheim rocket, right? So very different key, but same texture. And what I like about these fantasies, they range from, I'd say, intermediate to like early advanced, is that they're very, very short. It's teaching you a different structure outside of just sonata form. So you don't get to find that many fantasies of different kinds of sections and character ideas throughout such a short piece, which is why I think they're so great. Okay, moving on. Hear it again. This is Marianne von Auenbrugger, who's an Austrian composer, studied with Haydn and Salieri. And Haydn had so much respect for both her and her sister, who was also a fantastic forte pianist, that he dedicated 6 of his piano sonatas to Mariana and her sister. And the E flat major sonata, which is the one that I'm going to be talking about a bit, she, as you can see from her dates, she also did not live very long. And so when she passed, Salieri, which I think was such a great patron and friend, decided to double publish one of his own works with this E flat major sonata. So since most people probably knew Salieri more, they would go to whatever music store it was and they'd buy this score by Salieri and be pleasantly surprised to also find a second work, and that was by Marianne von Auenbrugger. This E flat major sonata, I just decided to pick the 3rd movement, the rondo, because I've taught it before. And again, it's another great piece to show how to teach rondo form. It goes in very unusual key areas. And there's some challenging passage work as well that I think is valuable to teach your students. This is just the 3rd movement, but the 1st movement is in sonata form. The 2nd movement is in a slow subdominant key in ABA form. And I guess we'll just hear a little bit again of maybe the first theme of this. Great, and that's enough. So yeah, you can hear that deceptive cadence, and then as it later resolves then to the tonic key just a few bars later. But it's a really fun piece. I've enjoyed teaching it. My student who learned it and played it really loved it as well. So I hope that you add that to your repertoire.
And now we move to the Romantic era. I know we're a little short on time, so I'll try and keep this short and sweet. First, we have Mel Boni, who was born in Paris to a lower middle class family. She taught herself piano, which is like kind of incredible. And by 12 was convinced to enter the conservatory to study with César Franck. Originally, her parents were not too fond of the idea of her studying music, but when you have a gift. Her full first name is Melanie. but she adopted a more androgynous sounding name, obviously because there was certainly some pushback back in their day for women composers. And she composed about 300 works, most of which are for piano. And if they're not for a solo piano, they most likely will consist, her like chamber works or anything most likely consisted of piano as well. So for the first piece, we have the machine, or the sewing machine. I'm not even going to try and say it in French. And what I think is really great about this piece is that, so we have the key of G major, not a super crazy key. We just have one sharp. The student can focus on articulation in the left hand. You have this ostinato D and E for the entire piece. Rhythmically, nothing too crazy. You might have a tie, the craziest rhythm you have, or maybe those ties and a dotted quarter into an eighth note. And I'll just play it real quick for you. It's short. Adorable. So I just paired that with, I have the opening of the New World Symphony. So luckily the student doesn't have to worry about chords or anything. Yes, it's certainly a challenge to coordinate, and you have some hand crossing, but overall I think pretty doable. Okay, moving on, we have German composer Luisa Adolphe-Lebeau, who studied with the likes of Clara Schumann, Franz Lachner, and eventually Reinberger. I thought it was a little funny. I found out that her studies with Clara was only for one summer, for 12 lessons to be exact, and they decided to part ways, apparently because of some artistic differences, which I found a little funny. Her family relocated a lot, but because of that, she was able to tour a lot of different cities around Europe. She composed tons of music, piano music, chamber works, and symphonic works, even to operas. Later in life, she did withdraw from composing, but still performed a lot of her own music and would write reviews for concerts. So I decided to include, I think her compositional style is really similar to good old Robert Schumann. You have here focusing on line in the outer part of our right hand, similar to these pieces in Schumann's album for the young. We know those sort of get harder as you go along. So the same sort of issues or challenges, and I'll just play a little bit of this for you so you can hear. I think it sounds pretty much like Schumann. These are from her preludes. There are 2 books, 1 through 4 and 5 through 8. Harmonically, they are also really, Schumann can get a little wiggly, and I feel like these are the same way, but also pretty beautiful. Love that. Oh my gosh. And the piano I'm on, of course, is having a day. Okay, and moving on, we have none other than our very own Amy Beach, American composer and prodigy pianist, born in good old New Hampshire. She, I know, composed a mass that really put her on the map prior to her big Gaelic symphony, which was the first symphony composed and published by an American woman, which is pretty amazing.
So when we enter the 20th and 21st century, which is both a massive period of time and an incredibly diverse period of time, I mean, if you just think of the late 1960s, there's like 8 things going on. We're spoiled for choice, right? So we're going to frame this part a little bit differently. This is more of an exploration of styles rather than sort of the replacement, just because we get a lot of new things as well in the 20th and 21st century, right? Thanks to things like globalization and just increasing awareness of other cultures. And so I've chosen 3, mostly just because I like them. There were so many I could have picked apart from these ones. So I thought it might be interesting to look at Germaine Taillefer, who's a name maybe people are familiar with from music history class when they studied Lessees. She was the only female member of that group, right, which was the sort of grandfathered by Eric Satie, where they included like Arthur Honegger and Darius Milhaud. They all met while attending the Paris Conservatoire, but you maybe don't know her music as much. Much like a lot of members of Lessees, Taillefer worked with a lot of the leading figures in 20th century France, right? She worked with Ravel, she worked with Sergei Diaghilev, the ballet impresario, and she knew a lot of the other famous leading characters. She knew César Franck, Gabriel Fauré, the Boulanger family, right? These are all sort of interconnected at this time. And she was incredibly prolific. She wrote piano concertos, she wrote chamber music, there's a lot of solo music, ballets, and I love this, she wrote film scores. And so this was a lot of the end of her life. You can see she lived to 1983. So if you're big into French film, you can actually find films that she wrote music for, which is really cool. And she's kind of having a little bit of a renaissance right now because much of her music just wasn't published, especially not published out of France until after her death. And so we're seeing more and more of her music, which I think is always exciting. I also decided it would be interesting to sort of branch out, and I wanted to look at this piece, Jeux de plein air, which means games in the open air, for 2 pianos, because this is one of the great sort of late intermediate, early advanced 2 piano pieces. So it's not too difficult. I know a lot of 2 piano rep is really hard for students, and so I thought this one was really great. It's in 2 movements. The first movement is definitely easier than the second movement, but even in the second movement, it's not terribly difficult. And it means outdoor games. So the first movement is La Tire le Tintin, which, as far as I can tell, is translated to twirly whirl trill, which is some old-fashioned French game that I have no idea what it is. And then the second movement is called hide and seek, which is cache cache matula, which is a fun French word to say. Her style, it's sort of exactly what you'd expect. If you want to explore the sort of French impressionist symbolist / salon style that was very common at the time, right? You hear it in Nadia Boulanger, Lily Boulanger, Debussy, Ravel, right? That whole sort of style period there. It, like a lot of her colleagues, includes some use of experimental harmony and, of course, has a lot of syncopations. So I'll play just the first little bit of Le Tire le Tintin. It goes on from there, which I think this is a really effective piece. I've taught this piece and performed it myself, and so I've sort of looked at it from both sides, and it's a really great piece of music. So the next two composers I chose because there's not really replacements, right? These are just new styles that are entering the piano repertoire that I think are important. So this first composer's name is Fred Ono. That's what he goes by. I don't know how to say his last name. His friends call him Fred O, so it's even shorter if you know him well. He's an American-Nigerian composer, though he was born in Ghana, and he's actually particularly well known as a choral conductor, even though he has a lot of great piano music. And he comes from a really interesting background where he studied both composition and computer programming. So he actually has some electronic music, which is kind of neat as well. His music is heavily influenced by indigenous African music, especially from his heritage in Nigeria. And then, of course, the American diaspora, right? Places like the Caribbean and the American Deep South and other places where you find this music. And he became especially well known because his film called The Good Shepherd, which came out in 2006, featured, George Clooney was in it. That's who it was. And they used one of his pieces in The Good Shepherd, and that sort of brought him into like the mainstream. As far as his piano music goes, he's got these really great etudes. They're called 24 Studies in African Rhythms, and they range from intermediate to advanced. You can go through them all. They're fantastic pieces of music. And if you want to sort of twist your students' brains about how to understand rhythm in a different way, these are fantastic. They are etudes in that they do focus on rhythm. So it's not like a passage work kind of etude, but rather all about understanding how rhythm can be used. And this first, the one that I chose just because I liked it, is study number 3. I'm going to butcher all these names, but it's Uja, which is a type of dance from the Yoruba people in Nigeria. And most people are maybe familiar with the Yoruba people. That's where you get the talking drum. But this is one of the other main sort of ethnic groups in Nigeria. And so we'll hear Nduka, the pianist, play Fred Ono's piece here. So you can hear, right? These are really fun pieces. There's a lot of ostinato repeated rhythms. Once you get the gist of whatever he's going for in each different etude, you can kind of get through the whole piece. And they're really very cool pieces. So the last composer that I chose is Tandun. basically because I teach film music class right now, and we're watching Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. And so I was very much in a Tan Dun kind of mood when I chose this. So he's a Chinese American composer, born in China, largely based in New York City right now, who's very famous for combining Western and sort of traditional Chinese musical elements in his music. And you can see that where he studied, right? He studied at both the Central Conservatory in Beijing as well as Columbia University in New York. And he's perhaps most famous for his very public-facing, right, movie score for Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, which if you haven't seen, it's amazing. You should definitely go watch it. And he did the theme for the 2008 Olympics. And he also was one of the first composers to use YouTube to compose a piece. He has the new Eroica Symphony, where you could submit your performance to YouTube, and he put it all together. And you actually, if you watch it, you'll see me playing it, because my twin brother is a cellist and he submitted something. And so you'll have that there. And it's a pretty good piece, if a little cheesy. His most famous piano works are definitely the 8 Memories in Watercolor. I first played these in my undergrad, and they're really fantastic pieces. There's 8 different movements. Movement number 4 is probably the simplest at a late intermediate with Blue Nun, and it goes up to early advanced. And they are based on both his own personal experiences growing up and on various folk traditions in the Hunan province. And you get a lot of different sort of styles. So there's Impressionist, right? The 7th movement, Floating Clouds, is very much a study in Impressionism. There's a lot of folk songs from China being used. There's some polyphonic writing. There's even a piece that imitates the guzheng, the plucked instrument. This piece was not originally dedicated to Long Long, but Tan Dun heard Long Long perform it and was so blown away by what he did with it that he retroactively dedicated it to Long Long. And so when you listen to Long Long's performance, know that you don't have to go as fast as he did, because he takes the easy kids movements like at breakneck speed, but they're really very cool. And the movement I want to play for you, just because I think it's one of the most approachable for younger pianists, is Staccato Beans, which apparently is the name of some game that he would play as a youth in China. And so it's really cute. I think it's a highly effective piece, and sort of goes on from there. Ooh, and I think that's it.
Thank you guys so much. If as you can see, if you all need to, if you want to get in contact with us, you can email us. You can go to our website. You can check us out on social media. Just to close, I personally want to say, like, one of the most useful things and one of the most immediate things that you can do is share this stuff with your students. And I found that really easy to do once we started doing this work, and finding out what your students react to, and especially when it's a composer that is like them in one way or another. Of course, I can only look through my lens as a Black classical pianist, specifically in America. And I'll admit I've been particularly hesitant about programming certain works in my own performances at the expense of the perception of pigeonholing myself as a certain type of Black classical pianist, but also uninformed about the amount of music by historically suited composers that are really out there and outside of the handful of composers and genres I was familiar with prior to doing this work. And so we just want to reiterate that this is simply in addition to, not instead of. And I think we're all really looking forward to seeing perhaps what pieces end up becoming standards to our generation, but especially the ones that are the youngins that are, I think, having being a little bit more exposed to a more inclusive works, you know, just in general. So thanks again.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really, yeah, thanks for all this like information. There's just a plethora of information. I was just really inspired actually by the origin of this project, actually just the grassroots spreadsheet and just genuine self-reflection and curiosity. So if I could just ask a question, I'm actually curious how, for the panel, how this project and your involvement with it has like maybe shaped or influenced the way you guys teach, or just as a musician, how you guys go about your lives and whatnot. But I'm just, yeah, it's just so, there's just so much great information, and I'm just overwhelmed by I'm just excited, I guess, about the possibilities of what we can do from this. And just, yeah, it just started so small, and I just see the possibilities that can come from this. So I'm just curious about how it has affected you guys.
Who wants to go first?
I think I'll just quickly say,
Yeah.
again, like we're totally a starting point, right? And so like I've learned so much just from not only what this team has like contributed to the resource, but what everyone else that contributes to it. There's just like so much out there that it was really easy to not pay attention to, you know, before, for one reason or another. And I'll just quickly say, you know, once you're aware of a problem, you kind of never, and you care about it, you kind of never forget about it. So it just becomes a part of how you operate in general. And being back in school, I had to give my first jury last semester, and they said they think it's the first jury they've ever heard that was all female composers. So I think it's just, you know, once you are aware of the problem, it's kind of hard to ignore it and hard to not want to do something about it.
Yeah, I'm similar in the way that this project has been highly educational for me. It made me realize just how many great composers I missed in my formal education, and really, it's a shame that I didn't get to study all of these composers. And I've definitely incorporated more and more marginalized composers in my own teaching and my performing. And non-musically speaking, I think this project really opened my eyes to just, you know, the general work of equity, diversity, inclusion, not to just say, you know, check off the box and say, oh, I'm doing EDI work, but as someone, I personally identify as someone who's been marginalized, it also teaches me how to be a better ally to other marginalized members of from other communities, because you know we're all in this together. And so yeah.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's been so informative to do this project and to learn from my co-directors and from the people who contribute to this resource. I'm just excited about all these discussions. We've all, like everyone on this team has been now part of like several presentations, either at conferences or at local organizations, and just being able to share this work and seeing other people also get excited about it, I think is so meaningful to us, because it means that this work is being valued and people are utilizing it. And people are also equally, I think, curious about the ways that they can enhance and diversify the works that they're doing, and doing it in a meaningful way, I think, of not just kind of, again, checking those check boxes, of like really thoughtfully thinking, why am I programming this? Why am I teaching this? Is it okay for me to teach this? You know, all of those questions are really, really important. And a lot of times we don't know the answers to a lot of those. And so that's why just talking to peers, talking to teachers, talking to your students is going to be so helpful.
Thank you. I think some of our members had to leave because of the 11 o'clock time. So I think that's what it's, but we can still go on. I have a small question. Um, I saw on your website that you can probably find IMSLP links and all of that. Do you know if there's some sort of move toward making this music like in a compilation, specifically for kids? It's hard for them, and it's not very appealing for them to look at an IMSLP score. The way it's the print, it's not fun even for an adult. It looks hard, even though it's not hard. It looks hard. Is there, and even like the paper, those little tiny things when it comes to, for instance, an adjudication, and whether things are accepted, somehow it looks more acceptable if it's in a book. So I just wanted to know if you knew, besides the Helen Marley, I mean, that was already like, ding, I can buy the book like and order it on Amazon. Do you know how some of these pieces are being compiled?
So I can answer that a little bit, because one of my students, and she's actually currently writing a blog entry for our resource for our website. Her name is Angela Rumble. She was a voice major, but she also teaches piano. And she's actually doing exactly this, of taking scores on IMSLP that are difficult to read and making them easier to process and learn, especially for students with dyslexia. So she's looking at font. She's looking at how many staffs are there per page. Can you organize it actually by section for each page? Like the color of the paper, little things like this she's working on. And I don't know like when she's going to have these types of things publicly available, but I've talked to her about making it into an actual anthology, because I think it'd be really, really great for a lot of teachers. So that's something to look out for. But you're totally right that a lot of the stuff that you find on IMSLP, it's like, it's not very inviting and it's really difficult to read. And so I think that is the next step. And hopefully like we can have some involvement in this, but of trying to create more accessibility of these scores, even though they're available, but just making them easier to learn and process.
Yeah, and actually one of our dreams is to commission unrecorded works. I think a part of the reasons that causes resistance to learning these kind of works is, the music is being hard to read, and also there's no recordings. No one knows what this sounds like, and so it's just to increase the overall accessibility. So we're hoping to expand into that realm soon, hopefully. Yeah.
Well, I could also say that Elizabeth Jacques de la Guerre is very known within the early music community. And so far it is that she's often a requirement. You have to play Elizabeth Jacques de la Guerre in a competition for an audition. It's pretty normal. And so it'd be kind of cool if we could see that in our piano things, a requirement for some of these composers, and get them so publishers have to publish them. And, if they make money, they're all for it. So anyways, yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I agree.
Just to finish up, there's some comments. Oh, but Gay has a comment.
Oh, I just wanted to say, I found this so interesting, and it just made me think of like, a sunken ship that you kind of know is out there. There were women composers, but we really haven't like heard that much about them. And so to kind of have you guys tell a little history in addition to hearing their music, and the fact that they all died so young, I just felt like this was just such a fascinating presentation, and the composers you chose were just fantastic examples. And just congratulations to you guys. I think it's really helpful in opening up this whole exploration. You're making it sort of a lot easier for us, and just congratulations. That was really great. Yeah.
Thank you, Gay. Really appreciate that. And it's fun because Kristen, you just mentioned piano music she wrote, which yes, it's a really, really great resource. And we're kind of the mindset of like the more the merrier. It's been really a beautiful thing seeing all these other resources pop up within the past few years, that sure, there might be some similarities in the work that we're doing, but if anything, that's just making everything a lot easier and making things more accessible. So we're just contributing and being like one of those partners within this larger picture, which is fine, which is really great.
Yeah.
We have one quick question from Vina. Do any student programs stick out as particularly interesting? I don't know if Vina wants to explain that or. Okay.
What do you mean by student programs? Like specifically curated works for students?
Actually, I guess I should elaborate. We just did student achievement testing, so perhaps there's a, early intermediate person who needed 3 styles. I'm very curious how this might have informed preparing students for testing, for example, or a high school student who did a recital, what have you. But I'm curious about programming for events, let's say.
Yeah, I mean, I think like say for example for SAT, like some of the pieces that we talked about today could even be utilized for that. And because we include leveling in our database, you can just kind of sort through if you're looking more for a late beginner or intermediate, late intermediate, it's all in there. And if you just even want to filter through and just find those pieces to help you with programming or selecting pieces for adjudication, that's definitely a possibility. But it's kind of like world's your oyster. Like we've always kind of stuck with these few pieces, and now that we like know of these all these really great other works, like you have so many more options.
Also, I'm just gonna say there's enough out there that you'll find something that you will actually like teaching and playing. Like there are plenty of options out there. Like I'm sure you can find one,
Yeah, definitely.
Well, thank you everybody for today's presentation. It was great. Very, very informative. And you had the Francis Clark online course, so that everyone can look that up. And thank you. So I think we will conclude today's meeting, and I'm going to stop recording.
Great. Thank you so much.
You.
Thank you.
Bye,
Thank you,
everyone.
everyone. Thank you.